Entering the living room, I was met with a pile of cardboard boxes. "What's going on here?" I asked, confused. From behind the boxes, my mother-in-law emerged with a smirk of triumph. "You're back. Maxwell told me you don't want me to have a key, but you can't just shut me out like this," she snapped. I froze, realizing the depth of the betrayal. "I'm moving in. This apartment in the high-rise is mine now," she blurted out. Her words made my head spin, and for a moment, my world seemed to collapse. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. My name is Doris. I turned 35 this year. I've been married to my husband Maxwell for 6 years. We were a working couple with different jobs. Maxwell, who used to work for a securities company, quit 2 years ago and is now a day trader at home. I was working at a jewelry shop, fulfilling a dream I had since childhood. One day, before heading to work, I spoke to Maxwell, who was leisurely drinking coffee. "Maxwell, I'm going to work. Can you do the laundry?" "Huh? I'm busy," Maxwell replied with a bothered expression, which annoyed me. "I'm doing all the other housework, so it's okay for you to do that much," I argued. "You think I'm taking it easy because I work from home? I'm not going to do it," he snapped. Just as I was about to retort, the living room door opened. "Hey, Doris," said my mother-in-law Rose, suddenly appearing. "I've been listening for a while now, but what do you mean by trying to get Maxwell to do housework?" I stared at her in shock. "What brings you here all of a sudden?" "Oh, by the way," Maxwell said casually, "I gave my mom the key to this apartment." "What? Why would you do such a thing on your own?" I protested, but my mother-in-law interrupted with a glare. "Do you have a problem with that?" Rose continued. "Besides, it's strange for a wife to make her husband do housework. Doris, you should be doing it properly." "That's right, Mom. Tell her more," Maxwell chimed in with a grin. "You're not even earning much, but you're a cheeky wife." Feeling attacked, I bit my lip. "I understand. I'll do it when I get back, so please leave it." "That's right," my mother-in-law said triumphantly. "A wife should be obedient to her husband." I avoided meeting her smug expression and walked out of the house. My mother-in-law, however, was the real challenge for me. Ever since she was widowed, she had been living alone nearby. She seemed proud of Maxwell, who graduated from a top university, and adored him excessively. Rose didn't like me from the beginning, and constantly made sarcastic remarks. My husband never sided with me when she attacked me, and I soon realized he was a mama's boy with high pride and a tendency to show off. After that, my mother-in-law started visiting frequently, criticizing my housework and clinging to her son all day. This life exhausted me. One day, on her birthday, I reluctantly went to her house alone, as Maxwell had an errand. "Happy birthday," I said as I handed her a beautifully wrapped gift. "It's a new product from our brand." Before I could finish, she let out a loud click of her tongue. "What is this? You're trying to get it cheap. You probably bought it with an employee discount, didn't you?" Rose scoffed, her tone dripping with sarcasm and disdain. "That's not true." I hurriedly denied it, but she wouldn't listen. "I don't need such a cheap thing that doesn't even fill my stomach." "You're not thoughtful at all," my mother-in-law said dismissively. Even though I had prepared it hoping to please her, she started nagging with a glare. "You're noisy. I don't like that you're working at a jewelry shop. It's too flashy," she added, her voice sharp with irritation and disapproval. "That's too much," I snapped back. "I'm proud of my work." "A mere saleswoman proud? That's laughable. You're being fed by Maxwell. Return this useless thing and bring me a gift certificate," Rose demanded. I packed the present back into my bag, left her house, and headed to the department store. "I'd like $200 worth of gift certificates, please," I said, my heart heavy. I bought gift certificates at the department store, had them wrapped as a present, and returned to my mother-in-law's house with heavy steps. "I'm back," I called out. My husband, who had arrived at some point, popped his head out. "Doris, today is Mom's celebration. I've ordered some fancy catering," he announced enthusiastically, clearly proud of his contribution to the event. The dining table was filled with catering from a famous restaurant. "What? I bought ingredients to cook," I exclaimed, standing there dumbfounded. My mother-in-law interjected from the side. "What are you talking about? It's obvious that this is better than your cooking." "Maxwell, thank you," she added. All I could do was look at the two of them with a dissatisfied expression. After that, I reluctantly sat down with them at the table, and we began to eat. Maxwell and my mother-in-law were chatting happily, but I couldn't bring myself to join the conversation. When the mealtime was nearing its end, Maxwell suddenly brought it up. "Hey, Doris, isn't it about time we moved?" he asked. "What? Move?" I asked, confused. "You know, a new high-rise apartment was built nearby, right? I think it would be a motivation boost if I could work in a place with a good view like that," my husband continued. "Oh, that sounds nice," Rose chimed in with a dreamy expression. I hurriedly said, "Isn't our current apartment good enough?" However, Maxwell clearly looked unhappy at my words. "We have plenty of money to spare, so it's fine," he replied. My mother-in-law also glared at me and said in an intimidating manner, "That's right. Don't go against your husband." I was completely taken aback, and all I could say was, "I understand. Surely if moving makes my husband's work go smoother, it's not a bad thing. Not giving my mother-in-law a key when we move might actually make things better than they are now." I convinced myself of this and agreed to move to the high-rise apartment. While proceeding with the procedures, I said, "Maxwell, I want you to promise me something. Can you not give your mother the key when we move?" "Huh? Why?" he asked, puzzled. "Because I can't deal with your mother's constant meddling. If you can't promise that, then I can't go through with the move," I said firmly. Maxwell seemed to think for a moment and put his hand on my shoulder. "All right, if that's what you want, I get it. I won't give her the key," he reassured me. "Thank you, I'm glad you understand," I replied. My husband seemed to be looking forward to the high-rise apartment quite a bit, and with the promise not to give the key to my mother-in-law, I was able to prepare for the move with peace of mind. A few months later, we finally moved to the high-rise apartment. The location was great, the view was excellent, and the interior was luxurious. For a while, Maxwell and I lived in the high-rise apartment alone, and we finally had peaceful and happy days. A few weeks later, I had a business trip and had to leave the house for a night. On the day of the business trip, Maxwell sent me off with a smile. I hopped on the train, headed to my destination, and kept busy with one task after another. I managed to finish my work, bought souvenirs, and returned home. When I opened the door, I noticed a bear ornament that hadn't been there before. It was the same one from my mother-in-law's house. I had a bad feeling and went to the living room, where there were stacks of cardboard boxes. "Oh, what's this?" I exclaimed. Then my mother-in-law, grinning from the back of the cardboard, appeared. "You're finally back. I heard you told Maxwell not to give me the key. You can't shut me out like that," she retorted. I panicked and confronted her. "What on earth is this luggage?" "What do you mean?" "I'm going to live here. My son's high-rise apartment is mine," Rose concluded. "What about the house you were living in?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "That place was rented, so I've already canceled it," my mother-in-law replied proudly. Her words made my head spin. Just then, Maxwell walked into the living room after my mother-in-law. "Oh, Doris, you're back," he said nonchalantly, as if everything was perfectly normal. "Maxwell, what is this? I didn't hear about this," I said, my voice rising. "It's fine. We have extra rooms," he replied dismissively. "I can't live together," I continued desperately, appealing to him, but he looked at me coldly. "If you have a complaint, you should leave," he replied. "That's right," my mother-in-law added. "Maxwell and I are going to live here, so the nuisance should leave quickly." I couldn't believe they would ambush me like this after all their previous behavior. To top it off, they were telling me to leave. I gritted my teeth in frustration, but spoke calmly. "I understand. I will leave this house," I said. "If you understand, pack your things quickly and leave. It will be interesting to see how you live from now on," my mother-in-law concluded, laughing. I packed my things while listening to her laughter. My husband avoided looking at me, but I clearly told him, "Maxwell, are you sure about this? You'll probably come back soon. Cool your head," he smirked. I left the high-rise apartment under their watchful eyes. A month later, I was relaxing in my newly rented apartment when the doorbell rang loudly. "Who is it?" I asked. "Hey, you?" "Open this place right now," came the angry voice. On the doorbell screen, I saw my mother-in-law, her face red, with my husband behind her. I decided to let them in to avoid disturbing the neighbors. "What can I do for you?" I asked with a troubled face. My mother-in-law snapped, "What do you mean we have to leave that high-rise apartment? That place has already been sold." "Sold?" I asked. "There's no way you could sell something that belongs to Maxwell," she said, glaring. "Something that belongs to Maxwell?" I glanced at Rose, confused, then added firmly, "That high-rise apartment is mine. I bought it." My mother-in-law turned to look at my husband, who stood pale and silent. "What is that?" "What do you mean?" she asked him, her voice trembling. I sighed deeply and looked straight at my husband. "Maxwell, didn't you tell her?" I asked. My husband remained silent, avoiding my gaze. I turned to my still confused mother-in-law. "You said it was a flashy jewelry shop, but our shop is a famous high-end jewelry brand. I am also the jewelry designer and manager of that brand," I said firmly. "Huh? Manager?" my mother-in-law exclaimed, her mouth wide open as she looked at me. "That's why I have some savings. By the way, the gift you said she didn't need because it was cheap is actually worth more than $10,000. I continued calmly. $10,000? My mother-in-law repeated in shock. "I returned it just like you told me to. By the way, the catering for your birthday was also paid for by Maxwell using my card," I added, glaring at my husband. "Huh?" My mother-in-law turned to her son and asked, "Maxwell, why don't you just buy back the high-rise apartment from this woman? You're a skilled day trader, aren't you?" My husband said nothing. Holding back a laugh, I turned to my mother-in-law. "Maxwell doesn't have any savings." "What?" my mother-in-law said, her face showing disbelief. My husband still stood silently. I calmly explained, "He's been losing a lot of money due to failed trades. He should have almost no savings left from his company employee days. Isn't that right, Maxwell?" "That," my husband stammered. "Maxwell, that's not true, is it?" my mother-in-law asked as she grabbed my husband's arm and shook him. My husband sat down on the spot, as if his knees had given out. "I thought if I moved to the high-rise apartment and got motivated, I would succeed in my work. But," he tried to justify himself. "But," I pressed, giving him a sharp glare. He continued in a muffled voice, "I failed again. I'm not sure if I can even afford to live with my mom, let alone buy back the high-rise apartment," my husband concluded. "Well, what?" my mother-in-law exclaimed, panicking. I didn't respond to her, instead crossing my arms as I turned to Maxwell. "So, you've been reckless with money, haven't you?" I said coldly. "I tried to support you because I thought that's what couples do, but clearly you had no plan." "Doris, I'm really sorry," Maxwell pleaded, dropping to his knees in desperation. "Please, give me a chance to start over." "Maxwell, what are you saying to this woman?" my mother-in-law interrupted, trying to get him to stand. But my husband shouted at her, "But Mom, if we don't do this, we won't be able to live." I turned to my husband, who kept apologizing to me, and spoke in a soft tone. "Maxwell, lift your head." When he lifted his head, his eyes were full of expectation. I continued gently, "You've always been told to get another job to support the household, but you never did. You never thanked me, and you never helped with the housework." That, "I'm sorry," my husband muttered, his face pale. I ignored his apology. "You took me for granted and told me to leave. And now this? It's too convenient for you, isn't it?" "That is," he stammered, but I cut him off. "I'm divorcing you. I want nothing to do with you anymore," I said coldly. "Doris," my husband pleaded. When I snapped at him, my husband tried to cling to me again, but I silently shook off his hand. My mother-in-law, who had been watching the whole thing, let out a mournful cry. "Wait a minute. What will happen to the high-rise apartment?" she asked hysterically. "That's clearly out of the question," I replied, my patience wearing thin. My mother-in-law shrieked, "So what are we supposed to do now?" "Why don't you live happily with your beloved son?" I replied sarcastically. At my words, my mother-in-law seemed to be in a daze. My husband, who had been hanging his head, stood up and I kicked him out. For a while, I could hear my mother-in-law making a fuss at the front door, but it seemed to quiet down when people came. After that, my husband and mother-in-law, who had been kicked out of the high-rise apartment, seemed to have rolled into a shabby apartment that looked like it was about to collapse. My husband had to work day and night to repay the debt he had made from stock trading, and my mother-in-law, who had never worked before, seemed to have to go to a factory part-time. I hope they understand a little bit about the difficulty of earning money while working hard, but it's none of my business anymore. As for me, the jewelry brand is doing well, and we have decided to open a store overseas. I bought a beautiful apartment for singles with the money from selling the high-rise apartment, and I am living a leisurely life. From now on, I want to live my life positively while cherishing my work.